Let me take you back a few years, to a time in my life that started with a high and nearly ended with me questioning whether I should walk away from a career I'd spent nearly a decade building. I'm not normally one for drama, but when someone plays dirty, especially with something sacred like Super Bowl tickets, I'm not the kind of guy who turns the other cheek. At the time, I was working for a mid-sized but well-known consulting firm on the West Coast. Our office sat in the heart of San Francisco's financial district, just a stone's throw away from where dreams got funded and deals got done over overpriced cocktails and rooftop lunches. And I was good at my job. Damn good. I was one of those people who could talk to both clients and engineers, understand both revenue targets and code, and bridge that elusive gap between creative strategy and technical feasibility. That versatility earned me a spot as a project lead on a few major accounts, nothing flashy at first, but enough to get my name into rooms that mattered. One of those accounts, we'll call them Atlas Holdings, was a tech conglomerate with deep pockets and an eye for efficiency. Their regional director, Will, yes, the Will, was the kind of guy you actually wanted to grab a beer with after meetings. He was laid back, generous, and had a laugh that could fill a room. Over the 2 years I managed the Atlas account, Will and I became more than business acquaintances. We were real friends. And the one thing we both obsessed over? Football. Will was a lifelong Raiders fan. I was a diehard 49ers guy. That rivalry led to countless trash-talking sessions, bar bets, and once, even a bet that forced him to wear a Niners jersey on a live Zoom call with his boss. Naturally, I took a screenshot. So when the 49ers made it to the Super Bowl that year, Will didn't hesitate. Through his company's sponsorship connections, he had access to premium seats, 30-yard line, lower level, the kind of seats that made the price of a new car look like pocket change. And because of our friendship, because he knew what it would mean to me, he arranged to give them to me. A surprise, he said, passed through official channels so I wouldn't see it coming. Those channels, unfortunately, ran directly through a man I'd grown to despise. Enter Richard Stansberry, better known in hushed tones and late-night Slack messages as Dickhead Partner. Richard had been at the firm since the 90s, a legacy guy who was, according to legend, impossible to fire. He wasn't incompetent, he knew how to play politics and had a Rolodex of crusty old clients, but his people skills were non-existent. He saw junior staff as tools to be used, abused, and discarded. He believed in dominance, not leadership. And most importantly, he took credit for the success of his teams while blaming every failure on the people below him. Unfortunately, because Atlas was a major account, and because Richard had technically closed the deal that got them on board years before, he still retained partnership oversight on all projects, even though I was the one managing the day-to-day. So when Will gave him the envelope with my name on it, 2 Super Bowl tickets, a private lot parking pass, and a handwritten note that read, "For the most passionate fan I know, go Niners," he saw an opportunity. He stole them. I had no idea, of course. The week of the Super Bowl came and went. I watched it from a friend's couch in Oakland, holding a beer and yelling at the screen, none the wiser. We lost, by the way. And it stung. But not as much as what came after. The following week, I was back in the office, catching up on emails and prepping for an in-person strategy review with Will's team. The meeting was productive, nothing unusual. Afterward, Will suggested we grab a drink at a bar down the street. I didn't think anything of it, we did this often. It was there, in a booth dimly lit by a flickering neon Budweiser sign, that he dropped the bomb. "So, serious question," he said, sipping his whiskey neat. "Why didn't you go to the game?" I blinked. "What game?" "The Super Bowl." I laughed, confused. "Wait, what?" He narrowed his eyes. "You're messing with me." "No, man. I didn't go to the Super Bowl." His face dropped. "I gave those tickets to Richard. I told him to surprise you with them as a thank you." "Don't tell me." I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. He leaned back in his chair and let out a long, slow exhale. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. My heart was racing. The realization hit me like a linebacker to the ribs. I had been robbed. I didn't want to believe it, but there was no other explanation. Will looked me dead in the eyes. "Don't say anything. Let me handle this." I nodded, too stunned to respond. Over the next 48 hours, I barely slept. I kept replaying every interaction I'd had with Richard over the past month. Had he mentioned anything? Had he slipped up? Nothing stood out until one detail emerged from the haze. A week before the Super Bowl, Richard had been mysteriously absent on Friday and the following Monday. No meetings, no calls, nothing on the calendar. He'd told our assistant he was entertaining a major client. I hadn't thought anything of it at the time. But now, it all made sense. Will reached out again later that week. I have a plan, he texted. The plan was simple and brutal. Will scheduled an in-person meeting between our firm and his team. Nothing out of the ordinary. He requested Richard attend, along with me and a few others. No red flags. But what Richard didn't know was that Will had constructed the entire meeting as a setup. The day arrived. We flew down to LA and arrived at Atlas headquarters just before noon. Their conference room was massive, floor-to-ceiling windows, espresso bar in the corner, and a glass table that could seat 20. As we walked in, I noticed a new face at the table. A woman in her 30s with curly hair and a confident smile. Will introduced her casually. This is Stephanie, VP from our Eastern Operations team. She wanted to sit in on the meeting. Richard, ever the schmoozer, offered a handshake and a too-fake smile. Nice to meet you. She smiled politely. Oh, I think we've actually met before. Were you the one sitting next to me at the Super Bowl? I nearly laughed. Will gave me a glance that said, don't you dare break character. Richard chuckled nervously. No, I wasn't there. She tilted her head. Really? I could have sworn. Will jumped in. That's strange. I gave those seats to me. He didn't mention sitting next to you. I shook my head. I wasn't there. Will looked back at Richard, his voice suddenly ice cold. Wait, you did give those to me, right? Richard's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He looked at me, then back at Will, panic setting in. I thought he couldn't make it, he stammered. I never got them, I said calmly. Stephanie, bless her soul, delivered the final blow. That's odd. Because the guy in your seat said he was representing your firm. Gave me his business card. She slid the card across the table. It was Richard's. Silence. Dead. Fucking. Silence. Will stood up. This meeting is over. Me, let's grab lunch. Stephanie, you're welcome to join. Richard, I think you should get back to the airport. Richard stood, pale and trembling. Will cut him off. Expect an invoice. We walked out, leaving Richard standing alone in the glass room, a reflection of shame surrounded by empty chairs. Outside, the three of us burst into laughter like kids skipping school. Stephanie was in on it the whole time, just an Atlas employee Will had roped into the scheme. Over lunch, Will laid out the next steps, an invoice for the ticket's secondary market value, a formal complaint to our managing partners, and a request to never work with Richard again. He would only deal with me going forward. I had just watched a man throw away his integrity for a pair of football tickets, and I hadn't even had to lift a finger. The aftermath of that orchestrated ambush played out like a corporate thriller, sudden emails, panicked phone calls, and internal whispering that spread like wildfire through the firm. I had a front row seat, watching it unfold while sipping cold brew in my corner office, pretending I didn't know anything. The moment we got back to San Francisco, Richard tried to get ahead of the inevitable. He sent out a damage control email to the executive board, copying only the partners. It was a lengthy explanation filled with business speak, circular logic, and the usual self-serving excuses, a breakdown in communication, unintentional administrative misstep, meant to enhance the firm's relationship with a high-priority prospect, blah blah blah. He didn't even have the balls to name me directly, just referred to me as the associate originally intended to receive the client's gift. But it was too late. The client had already spoken. By that point, Will had emailed the managing partners directly. His subject line was succinct. Breach of trust, immediate attention required. Inside, he outlined everything in meticulous detail. He made it clear the tickets were personal, that I was the intended recipient, and that Richard had deliberately rerouted them to another client without permission. More importantly, He attached the invoice. Secondary market value for the 30-yard line, Super Bowl tickets. $10,800. He also sent a separate invoice for the lunch we had after the meeting, which, by design, was ludicrously expensive. They had booked a private room at a Michelin-starred steakhouse, ordered the most expensive items on the menu, and drank aged scotch like they were celebrating a hostile takeover. Total bill, $3,200. And Will made it crystal clear that he expected Richard, not the firm, to foot the bill personally. To the partners, this was less about money and more about risk. The firm was already on shaky ground with a few of our high-value accounts due to increasingly impersonal service. Losing Atlas Holdings would be a financial gut punch. More than that, it would be public. Word gets around in this industry. A breach like this wouldn't stay quiet. 2 days after the email went out, I was pulled into a private meeting with Elaine, the senior-most partner in the firm. She was sharp, elegant, and more terrifying than any courtroom judge. Her office overlooked the Bay Bridge, and when the sun hit her window just right, you couldn't see her eyes, only your own reflection staring back at you like a defendant. She didn't waste time. "I want to be very clear," she said, voice cold and surgical. "We are deeply embarrassed by Richard's behavior. This was an egregious lapse in judgment, and we are currently reviewing disciplinary actions." I nodded, keeping my face neutral. "Understood. I'd like to ask for your help in keeping this client happy." "I'm happy to assist," I said. "Will's a reasonable guy." "Good. You'll be his primary point of contact from now on." That was my unofficial promotion. I now held direct authority over one of our most lucrative accounts. And Richard? He was toast, but he didn't know it yet. Not fully. The internal fallout escalated over the next 2 weeks. Atlas halted all active projects pending review. They didn't terminate the contract, but they froze all billing and made it clear that future business was conditional on Richard's complete removal. This caused an emergency partner meeting. In that meeting, the blame cannons fired in all directions. Richard tried to frame it as a misunderstanding, claimed he had forwarded the tickets to another client to build goodwill, and that he didn't know they were meant for me. But he had no documentation to back that up. In fact, everything was working against him. Will's handwritten note addressed specifically to me. The business card Richard had given away at the Super Bowl. The fact that he never even mentioned the tickets to me, either before or after the event. It was clear, he lied, he stole, and he got caught. The other partners weren't just angry, they were afraid. Losing Atlas would open the door to questions about ethics, favoritism, and the firm's internal culture. No one wanted that scrutiny. On the third Friday after the meeting with Will, Richard's email access was quietly revoked. His name disappeared from the partner directory the same day. An internal memo was circulated the following Monday. "Richard Stansberry will be stepping down from his position effective immediately. We thank him for his years of service and wish him well in his future endeavors." That's corporate speak for he was fired for being a dumbass and we're trying not to get sued. I knew the truth. So did every associate in the office. There was a collective sigh of relief. Suddenly, people weren't walking on eggshells. The energy shifted. Meetings didn't feel like battlegrounds. Junior staff weren't getting thrown under buses anymore. Morale improved almost overnight. But the story doesn't end there. About a month later, I was invited to attend a charity gala for local startups. Guess who I ran into at the event? Yep. Richard. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks, disheveled hair, a wrinkled blazer that screamed clearance rack panic buy, and a forced smile that barely held back resentment. We locked eyes across the hors d'oeuvres table. "My name," he said, nodding. "Richard," I replied. "Fancy seeing you here." He gave a brittle laugh. "Heard you're handling Atlas now." I smiled. "That's right." He sipped his drink, clearly holding back everything he wanted to say. "You always were a smart kid. And you always were a selfish prick." That caught him off guard. His eyes narrowed, but I didn't give him a chance to reply. "I didn't get those tickets. But I got your job. And honestly, I think I won." Then I walked away. Now here's the cherry on top. About 6 months after Richard's fall from grace, I got a call from Will. "Hey, got a question," he said. "Do you know anyone who used to work at your firm named Stephanie?" I blinked. "Stephanie, last name?" He gave it. "Oh, the fake VP from our meeting? That's the one. Yeah, I remember her. Why?" "She's applying for a senior strategy position here. Had your name listed as a reference." I laughed. "She deserves it. She held character like a damn Oscar winner." Cool. That's all I needed to hear. And that's how Stephanie, the girl who helped me expose a corporate con artist, landed a job at Atlas Holdings. Full circle. By the end of that fiscal quarter, things had shifted more than I ever could have anticipated. Atlas Holdings doubled down on their relationship with me, not just out of gratitude, but out of genuine trust. I wasn't just a vendor or account lead anymore, I was a consigliere. They invited me to quarterly planning meetings, pulled me into high-level discussions, and even floated the idea of me joining them full-time. The only thing stopping me was loyalty. Strange, I know, given what had just happened. But I wasn't ready to jump ship yet. I had clawed my way out of the shadow of Richard and into the good graces of the firm's leadership. Plus, I was now the guy who saved one of our most lucrative accounts from internal sabotage. My word held weight. And I knew how to use it. One of the first things I did with that leverage? I advocated for staff raises. Not huge ones, but enough to show appreciation, especially for the support staff. Secretaries, analysts, assistants, the ones who heard whispers before anyone else, who stayed late cleaning up messes made by people like Richard, and who kept the machine running. I asked for a modest 8% across the board for non-executive team members tied to Atlas. The partners balked at first. So I went back to Will. He smiled. "Tell them it's a condition for us staying." The raise was approved the next day. I didn't stop there. I proposed a bonus pool system, allowing clients to nominate firm employees for quarterly bonuses based on exceptional service. Guess who got the first nomination? Stephanie. Yes, that's Stephanie. Even though she wasn't technically part of the firm anymore, Atlas requested she be recognized for innovative cross-departmental strategy simulation. It was a hilarious inside joke, but it worked. The firm honored it. She received a check and a thank you letter on company letterhead. It was poetic. Meanwhile, Richard's reputation took a nosedive. You see, consulting, especially at the executive level, is a small world. The same names come up again and again, and word travels fast when one of those names screws up royally. Richard tried to land a new position at 2 different regional firms. Both turned him down. I found this out through mutual acquaintances, who told me that the story of the partner who stole Super Bowl tickets from an associate and got caught lying about it had become a bit of an industry legend. There was even a meme floating around. A stock photo of a guy with a name tag that read, "Hello, my name is fired for football." It was brutal. Eventually, Richard accepted a position at a boutique agency 2 states away, far removed from his usual playground. A glorified consultant role. No leadership, no accounts of his own, and definitely no profit sharing. From what I heard, he was making about 40% of what he did with us. And even that gig was temporary. They let him go after less than a year. Apparently, clients didn't trust him. Shocker. On my end, things were moving fast. I was approached by Elaine and another senior partner for an executive development track, essentially fast-tracking me to partner within 2 years. It was everything I had dreamed of when I first joined the firm: influence, equity, and a seat at the big table. But the events of the past year had soured me on the idea of climbing a ladder built by people like Richard. I had seen how easily loyalty could be weaponized, how success could be stolen if you weren't careful, and how justice was only served when someone had enough leverage to demand it. So I told Elaine the truth. "I'm grateful for everything, but I think I've hit my ceiling here. I want to build something, not just manage someone else's legacy." She nodded, not with disappointment, but understanding. "Then let us help you do that." That's how I found myself 6 months later launching a small but mighty advisory firm with a few trusted colleagues, and Atlas as my first client. The day we signed the official contract, Will and I went out for drinks. We were at a rooftop bar overlooking the bay, sipping whiskey as the sun dipped below the skyline. He raised his glass. To betrayal, revenge, and better partnerships. I clinked mine against his. To knowing who the real assholes are before they steal your Super Bowl tickets. We laughed, loud and unfiltered. Still can't believe he thought I wouldn't notice you weren't there, Will said, shaking his head. That level of stupidity should be illegal. Honestly, I'm glad he did. If I had gone to the game, none of this would have happened. I'd still be answering his emails and covering his ass. Will grinned. You'd be a loyal pawn. Instead, I became a well-paid rogue knight. He tapped the side of his glass and looked thoughtful. You know what I admire about how you handled it? What's that? You didn't get loud. You got strategic. Most people just scream or post on Glassdoor. You played chess. I shrugged. He gave me the opening. I just moved the piece. About a year later, I finally got my shot at the Super Bowl. Atlas gifted me 2 seats again, 30-yard line, but this time on the opposite side. It wasn't a surprise either. Will texted me a week before. You're going this time. No middlemen. Go enjoy it. The Niners lost again. But this time, I was there. I stood in the stadium, clutching overpriced nachos, feeling the roar of the crowd vibrating through my ribs, and I smiled. Not just because of the game. Because I had finally reclaimed something that was taken from me. And I didn't just take revenge. I won. For nearly a decade, I was the most reliable employee at Everhot Solutions, a mid-sized logistics firm nestled in a forgettable office park on the outskirts of Indianapolis. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't gunning for the corner office. But I was solid. When things went sideways, when a client threatened to pull a contract, when a system crashed mid-quarter, I was the guy people called. I worked weekends without complaint. Covered for co-workers without asking questions. I knew everyone's coffee order and remembered their kids' names. What I didn't realize was that I had become invisible. It started the day I trained Lindsay. She was fresh out of college, enthusiastic, and had an Instagram full of smiling selfies in various office outfits, which she posted with hashtags like #girlboss and #riseandgrind. She had an MBA from a place with ivy on the buildings and a line on her resume that read, Summer Strategy Intern, Fortune 100. Her second week in, I found myself explaining our outdated shipment tracking process over coffee in the break room. I watched her nod, pretending to take notes in her moleskin journal. 2 weeks later, she pitched a revolutionary tracking optimization idea in the Monday morning huddle. It was everything I'd told her, word for word, dressed up in some buzzwords and a Canva slide deck. The managers clapped. Literally clapped. Brilliant, said our director, Peter Hale, a man who had once described himself, without irony, as a disruptor of complacency. Let's put Lindsay on point to explore implementation. I waited for the after-meeting hallway acknowledgement, a thanks or nod. Nothing. Not from Lindsay. Not from Peter. That was the first time I felt it. The second came 6 months later, during the annual review cycle. I had been with the company 9 years. I had led 2 system overhauls, retained 3 key accounts through transitions, and stayed loyal through a merger that gutted half our department. My rating meets expectations. Lindsay, I later overheard near the copier, had gotten exceeds. She had been there less than a year. Still, I stayed quiet. I told myself it didn't matter. I wasn't here for accolades. I was saving for a house, for security. I'd worked retail for years before landing this job. I wasn't about to blow it over office politics. Then came the silence bonus. It wasn't called that, of course. Officially, it was the Retention and Appreciation Program. The company had a banner year, and instead of across-the-board raises, they issued one-time bonuses to high-value talent identified through leadership feedback. Every department had a handful of recipients. I wasn't one of them. Neither were the 3 other veterans in logistics who had been with Everhot since its founding. All of us, it turned out, had trained at least one bonus recipient. I found out from the company-wide email. The names were listed. Lindsay's was first under our department. I closed my laptop that day and stared at the office wall for 15 minutes, not thinking, just feeling. I'd always thought loyalty was noticed. That integrity counted. That maybe, just maybe, someone in charge saw the quiet work. They didn't. So, I decided I would be seen. Not loudly. Not all at once. But piece by piece, move by move, until the people who had overlooked me wouldn't just notice I'd be all they could think about. It started with lunch. Literally. For years, I'd eaten at my desk. It was efficient. It let me catch up on emails or finish the morning's to-do list. But now, I took lunch. Full hour. Out of the office. Every day. At first, no one noticed. Then someone asked if I'd been out sick. A few days later, Peter Hale swung by my desk and said, "Hey, you've been harder to catch lately." I smiled. Taking my lunch break. HR encourages it for mental health. He nodded and backed away. The second change was harder. I stopped volunteering. No more weekend coverage. No more "can you jump on this late call" texts. When the junior analyst panicked before a quarterly review presentation, I didn't swoop in to fix his slides. When our client from St. Louis sent a panicked Friday night email, I let Peter be the one to wake up early Saturday and talk them down. I kept doing my job, just my job, and watched the cracks form. By Q3, morale was low. The bonus recipients were still coasting on their early praise, but cracks showed in their performance. Lindsay's pitch implementation had stalled. Turns out, putting a new process in place is harder than a Canva deck makes it seem. Peter started pulling me into hallway meetings, asking hypotheticals, and fishing for help. I gave him just enough to keep the ship afloat, but not enough to keep him dry. Around that time, I learned something fascinating from an old buddy who worked in compliance at one of our partner companies. Peter Hale had been flagged for a potential conflict of interest. Something about contracts being routed to a vendor his brother-in-law owned. Nothing had come of it. The report had been closed due to insufficient evidence. But it gave me an idea. I'm not a hacker or a spy. But I know systems. I know people. And I know that when someone gets comfortable, when they assume no one's watching, they leave traces. I started digging. Peter Hale had always been careless with his calendar. He once left it open on a projector screen for 5 full minutes before realizing his mistake during a client meeting. I remembered that because one of the entries had a time block labeled spin session with a junior marketing analyst. That poor guy quit 2 weeks later. So I started casually hanging around the main conference rooms near the end of long meetings. When Peter packed up in a rush, he often left his laptop open. If you were nearby and greeted him just right, he'd forget to lock his screen. I didn't even have to touch anything. I just watched. His weekly Zooms with Halpern Consulting always showed up on Thursdays at 4:30 p.m. Curious, because we didn't have any active projects with anyone by that name, and no one else was invited. The meetings had one-line descriptions like vendor strat alignment and QBR run-through, but there were never any internal follow-ups, reports, or invoices. So I searched the name through our procurement database. Nothing. I checked the vendor authorization list. Nothing. Finally, I casually asked the finance guy I had lunch with sometimes, David, if he had heard of them. He shook his head and said, "Sounds like another Peter Blackhole vendor." "Why?" "Just saw it on his screen during a meeting," I said, pretending it meant nothing. But David had good instincts. "You think he's pocketing side money?" "I think he's the kind of guy who leaves his laptop unlocked," I said with a smile. That was enough. A seed was planted. Meanwhile, Lindsay's performance was slipping fast. Her tracking optimization plan had broken a legacy database integration, which caused a 2-day delay in shipping reporting to our largest client. Instead of owning it, she blamed the logistics team for being slow to adapt. That was a mistake. The logistics team was run by Ramona, a quiet, brilliant woman who'd survived 4 directors, 2 mergers, and 1 mild heart attack without ever missing a reporting deadline. Ramona called me that night. "I heard you trained Lindsay." I showed her how our system works. "She innovated all on her own," I said dryly. "She's hanging the delay on my team." "I know. I've documented everything I gave her. Time-stamped, versioned, CC'd Peter." Ramona was quiet for a beat. Then, How the hell are you always 10 steps ahead? Because they think I'm not even in the race, I replied. By Q4, I had gathered a folder. I called it Unseen Assets. Inside were screenshots of Peter's meetings with Halpern Consulting. A LinkedIn profile showing Halpern Consulting as a DBA registered to Peter's brother-in-law. A string of invoices from that consulting firm billed to Everhot, routed through a generic vendor code Peter had pushed through in his early months. Slack messages where Peter had directed a project manager to approve said vendor code ASAP or it'll hold up quarter close. I even had a recording. I wasn't supposed to, but in my state, only one-party consent was needed. During one of Peter's feedback meetings with Lindsay, they had become weekly, I used my phone to record the audio while sitting outside the glass conference room. He wasn't mentoring her. He was grooming her. It was subtle, but their phrases like, "You know, you've got a presence. If you play it right, you won't be stuck here long. This company rewards loyalty. But loyalty's not just showing up, it's showing up where it counts. I've got connections outside of Everhot. People who appreciate the full package. The smarmy tone, the power play, it made my skin crawl. But now I had it. I didn't go to HR. HR, at our company, reported directly to the executive leadership, which included Peter. And besides, our job isn't to protect employees. It's to protect the company from liability. I needed to go to someone with actual incentive to clean house. So I booked lunch with Charles Weatherby. Charles was Everhot's COO. He had joined 2 years earlier to modernize operations. He had pushed through the restructure that brought in Peter. But more importantly, he hated waste. Charles had been a Marine. He wore his trauma like a pressed suit, always composed, always alert. He once told me in passing, efficiency is morality. Waste is cowardice. I figured fraud and predation counted as both. I didn't dump everything on him at once. That would spook him. Instead, I brought a printed invoice from Halpern Consulting, highlighting the vendor code mismatch, and casually mentioned I'd stumbled across it while fixing a database report. I said I thought it might be a duplicate vendor, which could mess up year-end reports. Charles narrowed his eyes. Who approved this? Not sure. Code was pushed by Peter, but the project manager authorized it. Which project? Hard to say, no project ID is attached. Just says consulting retainer. Charles asked for a copy of the invoice. I slid it over. Appreciate it, he said. You always catch this kind of stuff. Only when I'm looking, I replied. He smiled thinly. Look harder. By early January, the cracks became canyons. Ramona had a face-to-face with Charles. Then David from finance. Then a quiet senior manager from IT who had, apparently, been told by Peter to get rid of some obsolete database logs. She didn't. They were archived. And recoverable. I kept my head down. Did my job. Took lunch. But word spread. Peter had a short temper to begin with, but now he was snapping at interns, slamming phones down, and skipping department check-ins. Lindsay stopped posting inspirational quotes and started muttering about toxic energy. Then, one Friday, it happened. Peter Hale was gone. No all-company email. No farewell party. No transition doc. Just a 7:42 a.m. message from Charles to all senior staff, effective immediately, Peter Hale has left the company. Please direct all reporting through your existing managers until further notice. The gossip machine churned. Lindsay cried in the women's bathroom. Ramona took the entire logistics team out for drinks. And I had a 2 p.m. calendar invite from Charles. Meeting title, Strategy Refresh Session. Attendees, Charles Weatherby, me. Location, Executive Conference Room A. When I walked in, Charles was already there. So was the CEO. She smiled at me. I had spoken to her maybe 3 times, ever. She said, "You've been busy." I didn't deny it. Charles cut to the point. "We need a new director of internal systems. Someone who knows where the flaws are. Someone who understands quiet strength." I blinked. "Me?" Charles nodded. "You held this place together while being underestimated. That tells me you'll know how to spot and fix what others miss. The CEO added, you also showed discretion. You never grandstanded. That matters to us. The offer came with a 40% raise and a seat at the strategic planning table. I accepted. Quietly. But that wasn't the end. I didn't move into Peter's office. That space had become radioactive, full of smug energy, too many mirrors, and a lingering smell of cologne and microwave lasagna. I asked for a modest corner in the analytics bullpen, close to my team. The CEO raised an eyebrow at that but ultimately said, your call. Just make sure people know who's in charge. They knew. Not because I told them, but because I listened. I held one-on-ones with every member of the systems team within my first week. I kept notes. I asked each person the same 3 questions. 1. What's working? 2. What's broken? 3. What would you fix first if you were me? It was remarkable how consistent the answers were. What's working? Our people. What's broken? The communication chain. What would you fix? Stop rewarding noise. Reward solutions. By February, we had scrapped 2 legacy reporting workflows and rebuilt a new modular system that cut quarterly prep time in half. No overtime. No burnout. Meanwhile, the HR investigation into Peter Hale's tenure had turned into a legal storm. Remember those off-the-books meetings with Halpern Consulting? Turns out, it was more than just siphoning funds. The so-called vendor was also processing reputation management services, essentially paying a shadow PR firm to scrub bad reviews from job boards and manipulate internal surveys. He'd also made personal payouts to 2 former employees under the guise of contractor incentives. These women had complained about inappropriate behavior and were quietly asked to resign with NDAs. But once the external audit team dug deeper, the threads unraveled. Peter had shielded himself well until someone pulled the right string. That someone was me. And I wasn't done. One afternoon, I got a message on Slack from Lindsay. Lindsay, can we talk for a minute? Me, about what? Lindsay, in person if you're free. I'm outside your office. I sighed. I had avoided her since the day Peter was dismissed. But I figured this was overdue. I motioned her in. She sat, arms folded, jittery. I want to apologize, she said. I got in way over my head. I nodded but said nothing. I thought I was doing what I needed to do to get ahead. Peter told me I had potential. He said you were playing it safe and I should take more risks. I didn't respond. I see now that I was being used. That got my attention. Used how? She hesitated. Then looked down. He told me things about you. That you were holding the team back. That you were bitter. That you sabotaged projects to make yourself seem like the only one who could fix them. That's quite a narrative, I said. I believed him. Do you still? No, she whispered. I leaned forward. So what do you want, Lindsay? I want to stay. But I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know I see it now. There was something raw about her tone. Not performative. Just exhausted. A house of cards that had finally fallen. I let the silence linger. Then I said, you'll stay. But not in strategy. She looked confused. Where then? Operations. Logistics. With Ramona. Her eyes widened. She hates me. No. She respects competence. And she has no patience for bullshit. If you want to rebuild trust, start there. Lindsay looked as if she'd just been handed a 10-year prison sentence. But she nodded. That was her first real act of humility. And I respected it. 3 weeks later, the email dropped. Subject, internal realignment, effective immediately. In the spirit of accountability and transparency, Everhot will be implementing a new compliance oversight role to ensure integrity in our vendor partnerships and financial practices. Please welcome your name as our new VP of Internal Systems and Ethics, reporting directly to the COO and CEO. The new role came with more responsibility, but also more power. I now had full access to vendor logs, expense audits, conflict of interest reviews, and whistleblower reports. I built a task force of quiet operators like myself, people who didn't crave visibility but always delivered. We implemented a new anonymous feedback system. We added mandatory conflict of interest disclosures for anyone in a client-facing role. And we began backtracking 3 years' worth of contracts signed by Peter Hale. That's how I found the bonus fund. Buried in the Q1 financials from 2 years earlier was a special pool created by Peter under the name Staff Retention Incentive. It had been pitched to the CFO as a way to quietly retain key personnel who were at risk of leaving for competitors. Except none of the people listed as recipients had ever seen a dime. Instead, the bonus pool, just over $400,000, had been siphoned into a shadow bank account tied to Halpern Consulting and then withdrawn in large chunks with non-specific memos like discretionary payout and employee wellness. I presented this to Charles in a sealed folder labeled Retention Lie. He read the first few pages. Then closed the folder. "How far does this go?" he asked. "Deep enough to warrant legal action. What's your recommendation?" "Settle quietly. Recover what we can. Use it as leverage if he ever tries to come back. And the money? Redistribute it. To the employees who should have gotten it in the first place." Charles smirked. "You ever consider a career in law? I like watching things work too much." By year's end, Everhot looked like a different company. Ramona had been promoted to Director of Logistics. David in finance now ran the audit division. Lindsay. She had become Ramona's most efficient project tracker. Her turnaround was real, and she'd earned it. As for me, I was still in the bullpen. But I had a nameplate now. And every month, a new analyst would drop by and say, "Hey, I heard you're the person to talk to if something seems off." And I'd smile. "Only if you've got receipts," I'd say. Because that's what real power is, not the ability to talk loud, but to listen, act, and leave behind systems that keep working even when you're not in the room. 6 months after Peter Hale's firing, the ripple effects were still playing out in strange, quiet ways. The company had survived the audit. Our internal ratings were higher than ever. We were recruiting talent we never would have attracted before. Word had gotten out that Everhot was no longer a place where competence went to die under layers of ego. Still, there was one loose end I couldn't shake. I got an email one morning with the subject line, "Anonymous, you missed one." No sender address. Just a burner inbox. The message was short. "Check the Sunset Initiative. Legal won't help. Ask Carol in product design about the Flywheel R&D budget in Q4 last year." I almost deleted it. But something about the tone felt eerily familiar. Like it came from someone who knew how things worked on the inside. That same day, I scheduled a coffee with Carol under the guise of reviewing upcoming resource allocations. Halfway through our chat, I casually brought up the Sunset Initiative. Her demeanor changed immediately. "You're not gonna pin that on me, are you?" she asked, guarded. "No one's pinning anything," I said. "I just want to understand why $280,000 was marked as R&D materials but the vendor receipts were for office equipment, mostly chairs." Carol blinked. "Because they were chairs. Custom-designed ergonomic chairs. For a partner firm. It was part of a cross-collab. With Halpern Consulting." Silence. Carol finally sighed. "Peter's idea. He wanted to get on good terms with someone high up in biotech. Said it was a strategic relationship. Those chairs were gifts. Not research. Why label it R&D then?" he insisted. Said it was better for taxes. And because legal never checks product spend. I leaned back. My pulse quickened. It wasn't just theft. It was fraud. Masked under departmental budgets that never spoke to each other. And suddenly, I knew who had sent the message. I went home that night and dug up an old contact from my IT days, Monica, a security contractor who now worked freelance. We met once on a vendor migration project. She was brilliant. And discreet. I called her burner line. "Still in the game?" I asked. "For you," she said. "Always." I asked her to check the metadata of the anonymous email. Just to confirm. Next morning, she texted me, "He's back online. Same VPN pattern. Looks like Peter Hale wants a comeback." Apparently, Peter had been trying to spin the story, painting himself as a scapegoat, a misunderstood innovator forced out by jealous underlings. He'd even written a LinkedIn post about corporate betrayal by cowards afraid of change, without naming names. But the comments were telling. Almost no likes. And a few buried replies from old coworkers that simply read, "Receipts matter." Now, he was shopping around a new consulting firm, Goldpoint Strategy, run out of a WeWork suite with 3 former interns and a glossy website full of buzzwords and stock photos. And worst of all, he was trying to poach ever-hot clients using his old contacts. That couldn't stand. I called a meeting with Charles, the CEO. "Peter's back," I said. "And he's trying to rewrite history." Charles pinched the bridge of his nose. I figured he'd pull something like this eventually. I laid out what I'd found. The chairs. The fake R&D. The budget overlap. And most importantly, the metadata from his burner email. "You think he's trying to blackmail us?" Charles asked. "Not yet. But he's laying the groundwork for a comeback narrative. If he finds one sympathetic client who believes he was railroaded, he'll be back in business." Charles looked me dead in the eye. "Shut it down." We coordinated with legal very quietly. No cease and desist. No legal threats. Just a fact-finding mission. We interviewed quietly. We traced vendor receipts. We flagged inconsistencies. We even reached out to former Halpern employees now working elsewhere. A few were surprisingly candid. And then I got a tip from someone at one of our client firms. Peter pitched us. Same decks. Same numbers. Even used your audit work to position himself as the guy who saw the problems first. Said he was pushed out for being too honest. That was the final straw. So we prepared the letter. It was short. Clinical. Brutal. To whom it may concern. We are aware that Peter Hale, former partner at Everhot Strategies, has been circulating information regarding his tenure here in a misleading and potentially fraudulent manner. Please be advised that Mr. Hale was terminated following a confirmed internal investigation involving financial misconduct, client deception, and HR violations. All inquiries regarding his time at Everhot should be directed to our legal counsel. Sincerely, Charles E., CEO. CC, Everhot Legal Team, Compliance, Risk Management. We didn't send it publicly. We sent it quietly to the 5 firms Peter was known to be courting. One of them was already in talks to sign with him. After receiving the letter, they all backed out. Goldpoint Strategy folded 2 weeks later. It would have been satisfying to end the story there. To say that the villain was vanquished, the hero promoted, and all was well. But life isn't that neat. 3 months later, I got an email from Lindsay. Subject: "You still listen?" I clicked. "Hey. I know we haven't talked much. But someone's been asking around about the audit files. Not sure what it means. Just thought you should know. Hope you're still listening." That was the moment I realized something important. Revenge is a burst of fire. Justice is maintenance. The silence bonus wasn't a moment. It was a system. Built slowly. Maintained carefully. Guarded ruthlessly. And I would keep guarding it. Even long after the villains stopped showing up. I never thought I'd see his face again. Not in real life. Not in a place like this. Not when I'd worked so hard to erase every trace of high school from my memory. It had been almost 12 years since I graduated from St. Augustine High, a school where I survived 4 brutal years, not by blending in, but by becoming invisible. Every hallway I walked, every lunch I ate alone, every notebook I clutched against my chest was shadowed by the same name, Tyler Grant. If hell had a physical form in the shape of a teenage boy, it would have looked like Tyler. He was popular, charming to teachers, and had a bright future playing college baseball. But to me, he was a nightmare wearing varsity letters. The bullying wasn't just your typical jock vs nerd teasing. Tyler made it personal. He'd dump my books in the toilet, call me maggot in front of the whole class, post fake Craigslist ads with my phone number, and once, he even locked me in the gym showers after practice and turned the lights off, leaving me in there for hours. But the worst part wasn't what he did. It was how he made everyone else laugh about it. Teachers ignored it. Classmates joined in. I was the weird, quiet kid with glasses, and Tyler? He was untouchable. Until he wasn't. After graduation, I vanished. I moved 2 states away, legally changed my last name, went to community college, and eventually earned my degree in IT systems. I cut off everyone from that past life. The scars never left, but the healing finally began. So imagine my shock when, 10 years later, I walk into my new job at Horizon Solutions, a mid-sized but rapidly growing tech logistics company in Colorado, and see a familiar smirk just down the hall. Tyler Grant. At first, I thought I was mistaken. Maybe it was someone who just looked like him, maybe a cousin, a lookalike, a cruel twist of fate. But the nameplate on the desk said it all. Tyler Grant, account director. He looked older. The sharp jawline had softened. His once perfect skin had taken on that permanent reddish tint you see in guys who drink more than they should. Still fit, but with the stiffness of a guy who peaked in his 20s. That same cocky air hovered around him like stale cologne. He didn't recognize me. Of course he didn't. I'd changed. I wasn't the scrawny kid anymore. I had grown into my frame. Contacts replaced the glasses. I wore fitted business attire. I had confidence, or at least the armor of it. My name wasn't David Myers anymore. It was Daniel Reed. Tyler had no idea the quiet new IT project manager he shook hands with was the same kid he once threw into a dumpster behind the gym. I smiled. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to confront him. I wasn't going to scream or demand an apology. No, I was going to ruin him. My first few weeks at Horizon Solutions were spent learning the internal systems and managing a few minor onboarding projects. Nothing high stakes yet, which gave me time to observe Tyler. He still carried himself like he was the king of the world. Arrogant, overconfident, and clearly underqualified for some of the accounts he handled. I dug a little deeper and realized the only reason he was still around was because of his close friendship with one of the VPs, Mark Denton. College buddies, apparently. But while Tyler partied with XX and took long lunches, he left behind a trail of disorganized client data, missed emails, and backlogged projects. Nobody said anything. That charm was still working, and most people didn't want to stir the waters. Except me. Quietly, methodically, I began collecting everything. Every instance where he failed to meet a deadline. Every email where he gave false information to a client. Every careless mistake he blamed on someone else. I made friends with the right people, especially those in the client retention and finance departments. I played the helpful IT guy, the new guy just trying to learn the ropes. I even helped Tyler once or twice when he messed up access permissions or forgot to submit a tech request. Always with a smile. I knew he had a temper, and I was waiting for it to come out. It didn't take long. A month into the job, I sat in on a joint meeting with a long-term client, Intracor Logistics. The client had been growing steadily, and this was supposed to be a check-in to expand their contract. Tyler was leading the call. He came in late, flustered, and completely unprepared. The client asked about their custom integration timeline, something Tyler had forgotten to follow up on. He panicked and turned to me mid-call. "Daniel, can you explain the delay on the back-end systems?" It was a lie. There was no delay on our end. In fact, we had finished the requested systems upgrade a week early and sent documentation to Tyler, which he never forwarded. I paused, smiled slightly, and said, "We completed that upgrade last Tuesday. I forwarded the full report and integration instructions to you, Tyler. Did it not go through?" His face went pale. The client raised an eyebrow. That was the first crack in his perfect image. And it was only the beginning. Part 3, Old Habits Die Loud. A few days later, I passed Tyler in the break room. He didn't say anything at first, but as I walked past him to grab my coffee, he muttered, "Next time, try not to throw your team under the bus." I turned slowly. "Just doing my job," I said calmly. He stared at me for a moment, eyes narrowing. Something flickered in them. Not recognition, but the feeling that I wasn't just another pushover. The next couple of weeks, Tyler started to unravel. I made sure to always copy his supervisor on key email chains. I asked polite questions in meetings that exposed gaps in his knowledge. I offered to help with things he didn't want to admit he didn't understand, and let him take credit for a couple of those things to build trust. Meanwhile, I kept feeding information to HR. Not directly, but through anonymous feedback channels and the company's performance review database. Then came the gift I didn't expect: Tyler's assistant, Maya. One day, she stopped by my desk and whispered, "You don't like him either, do you?" I looked up. "Who?" She smirked. "Tyler." I tilted my head. "He seems confident." She laughed. "That's one word for it." Over the next few days, Maya and I began talking. She was sharp. She had been running interference for Tyler for over a year, constantly cleaning up his messes and smoothing over client emails. "I keep everything," she told me one day. "Every version of every document he asks me to tweak." I don't trust him. I leaned back in my chair and smiled. Neither do I. Together, we created a file. We called it Project Karma. Every manipulated report, every ignored compliance requirement, every fake excuse he gave to a client, we documented it all. And we waited. It didn't take long before Tyler gave us the perfect opportunity. One of Horizon Solutions' biggest accounts, Viridian Freight, was gearing up for a Q4 expansion. They wanted to upgrade their entire logistics tracking system, and they needed a new digital integration built from scratch. It was a massive project with tight deadlines and a $3.2 million contract at stake. Tyler, of course, insisted on leading the project. He wanted the credit. And he had no idea what he was doing. In private meetings, he kept brushing off concerns from engineering, skipping over QA requirements, and promising the client unrealistic delivery dates. Worse, he was fudging internal reports to make it look like the project was ahead of schedule. Maya had copies of the originals, clearly showing delays alongside the doctored versions he sent to the executive team. This was more than incompetence. This was fraud. I made sure to be included in all email threads. I positioned myself as the technical liaison, just here to help smooth communication with the client. Tyler loved it. He thought I was playing the loyal right-hand man. I wasn't. 3 weeks before the Viridian Freight deadline, the cracks started to show. The client requested a live system demo. Tyler panicked and tried to stall. He told them we'd do a simulated walkthrough instead, basically a slideshow with fake data. They agreed, reluctantly. That's when I knew the time had come. I booked a lunch meeting with Clara Jensen, the head of compliance, and brought Maya along. Together, we presented everything: the altered reports, the ignored red flags, the false timelines, and even Tyler's derogatory comments in Slack, which Maya had quietly screenshot. Clara was stunned. Furious, but quiet. She nodded, took notes, and thanked us. A day later, Viridian Freight pulled the plug on the demo. They said they'd lost confidence in Tyler's leadership and were requesting someone else take over the account. The executive team was blindsided. I stayed quiet. I knew what was coming. At 9 a.m. the next Monday, Tyler walked into the office like nothing was wrong. By 10 a.m., he was being asked to meet with HR and the VP of Sales. By 11 a.m., he was packing up his things in silence. At 11:15, I passed his desk. He looked up at me, really looked. And I saw the flicker. Recognition. It was faint, like a dying light bulb in the back of his eyes. But he knew. "Do I know you?" he asked. I smiled. "No, I don't think so." And I walked away. A week later, I got a message from Clara. The executive team had reviewed everything. They were grateful. They offered me a quiet bonus and a seat at the project steering committee. Viridian Freight agreed to stay with the company on the condition that I be the new point of contact. The contract was saved. I never told anyone else who Tyler really was to me. I didn't need to. He lost his job. His reputation. Word got around. Tech consulting is a small world, especially when fraud is involved. As far as I know, he hasn't found work since. I found Maya the next day and handed her a sealed envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "Proof of everything," I said. "Keep it for yourself. In case anyone ever tries to screw you over again." She smiled and slipped it into her desk drawer. "Thanks," she said. "You're not what I expected when you joined." "I used to be the quiet kid," I said. "Now I just listen more than I speak." It's strange, the way life brings things full circle. High school was hell. Tyler made sure of that. But I got out. I rebuilt myself. I turned pain into purpose. And when the moment came, I didn't need fists or threats or shouting matches. I used his own arrogance against him. He stole my peace for 4 years. I took his career in 4 weeks. I'd say we're even. But we're not. Not even close.